Cumberland County 911 with the address of the emergency. Okay, tell me exactly what happened.
Okay, I just need an ambulance. My daughter's been sick the past couple of days and whatnot, and she was just taking a nap. She's home on quarters from her doctor.
Tell me what symptoms she's having so we know who to dispatch.
Well, she's unresponsive right now. Like, she's barely, breathing very light. She started puking in her sleep and started choking.
Okay. Is she passed out? Is she unconscious?
She's, you could see her breathing, but she's not responding to me.
This is the story of Jeanie Ditty, the mother of little Macy Grace. Jeanie had already hurt her daughter so badly that there was no way back, and now she was trying to spin a story during the 911 call to make it seem like an accident. But how did the situation reach this point? Let's rewind to where it all began. It was December 2nd, 2015. Zachary Earl Kiefer was in a panic, rushing over to Jean's apartment. Inside, he found Macy Grace, small, fragile, and struggling for breath, her tiny jaw clenched tight. He tried his best, doing everything he could to help her breathe. But in the midst of all that chaos, it was Jeanie who ended up calling 911. Nearly a full minute passed before she finally told the dispatcher that Macy wasn't responding. By 11:27 a.m., the ambulance arrived and rushed Macy to Cape Fear Valley Medical Center in Fayetteville. When they got there, things looked even worse. Macy was completely unresponsive. Her small body was bruised and covered in abrasions. The medical staff took just one look at her and immediately called the police. This wasn't just a sick child. It was clear someone had done this to her. Jeanie tried to explain it away, saying Macy had been sick and vomiting in her pajamas. But when Macy arrived at the hospital, she was wearing a brand new maroon and white striped dress, the tags still attached, and her hair was perfectly braided. None of it added up. As the doctors worked to warm Macy's body, her temperature was a dangerously low 92 degrees Fahrenheit, and more bruises started to show. It was like her body was slowly revealing the truth, with painful marks all over her body. After that, the decision was made to transfer Macy Grace to UNC hospitals in Chapel Hill. The doctors there confirmed what everyone feared. Macy had a severe brain injury, one that she wasn't going to survive. They moved her to the pediatric intensive care unit and put her on life support. When they examined her injuries more closely, it was obvious this wasn't an accident. There were bruises all around her neck, some shaped like a handprint, others like fingernail marks. There was no mistaking the violence that had been done to her. By the evening of December 3rd, Jeannie's aunt, Michelle Smith, came to see Macy. What she saw left her speechless. She confronted Jeanie right then and there, demanding answers. What had happened to the baby? It turned into a shouting match, and by the end of it, Jeanie and Michelle were banned from the hospital.
I looked at her and said, "What happened to this baby?" She looked at me and told me, "Don't you start on me too."
The next morning, things only got worse. The doctors confirmed what everyone had dreaded. Macy Grace had almost no brain activity left. At 6:59 a.m. on December 4th, they pronounced her brain dead. Macy's father, Kevin, was still overseas on deployment when all of this was happening. The Red Cross contacted him, and by then they had arranged for him to come home. He had made it just in time to see his daughter one last time and say goodbyes. He even gave Macy one last bath, the only thing he could do before they turned off the machines keeping her alive. On December 4th, 2015, just 10 days before her third birthday, Macy Grace passed away. The funeral was held at John F. Kennedy Memorial Chapel in Fort Bragg, a final goodbye to a little girl whose life ended far too soon. Following the tragic death of Macy Grace, Jeannie's narrative began to change. She told different versions to different people, trying to explain what had happened on that terrible morning of December 2nd, 2015. One day, she told a photographer who reached out on Facebook that Macy had choked on a banana and then on her own vomit, cutting off oxygen to her brain. But then, when the police questioned her, she said Macy had slipped in the bathtub and hit her head on December 1st. It was a mess of stories, none of which matched up. She even told the police that on December 2nd, she had called Zach, her boyfriend, because Macy wasn't feeling well. She claimed that Zach checked on Macy and everything seemed fine. But then, about 25 minutes later, Macy started making strange noises. Jeanie and Zach told her that Macy appeared to be choking on her vomit, and that's when she called 911. It all sounded so inconsistent. Even at the hospital, Jeanie texted her aunt, Michelle, saying that they were investigating her because Macy had lost oxygen to her brain when she aspirated, and they were accusing her of abuse. She insisted that Macy had no bleeding in her brain, just oxygen loss, but that wasn't true. Macy had bleeding on both sides of her brain. The stories kept changing. Jeanie told one friend that Macy had choked on a banana, then later said it was vomit, and then claimed Macy's lung had collapsed. Others said she had told them that Zach had been babysitting Macy while she had a medical appointment at Fort Bragg. She told another friend that she was there when Macy choked, but then later changed it, saying she wasn't even there. That Zach was babysitting because she was supposedly in the ICU with severe injuries from Zach's abuse. It was like Jeanie couldn't even keep her own story straight. She even went as far as telling a friend that she was in a coma and woke up to detectives asking her to draw a diagram of Macy's room. At one point, she claimed Zach was watching Macy while she was at work and completely left out the abuse or doctor's appointment. It was all over the place, and anyone listening could tell something was really off. The lies piled up, and they got messier each time. And then, not even 3 weeks after Macy's death, Jeanie and Zach moved in together. They found a new place, Unit 202 at Village Lake Court in Spring Lake. Their relationship had gotten serious, and it seemed like Jeanie was trying to leave everything behind. She even tried selling Macy's things online, her Frozen-themed bedding and other belongings on Facebook yard sale pages. People called her out, asking how she could do that so soon after losing her daughter. Jeanie said she just couldn't stand looking at Macy's things anymore. It was all just heartbreaking. Every version of Jeanie's story seemed to get more twisted, more detached from the truth. It was like she was spinning a web of lies, trying to make sense of something that simply couldn't be justified. After that, Jeanie's family was beyond suspicious. They weren't keeping those suspicions to themselves either. They spoke up, and it seemed like everyone knew something was off. Jeanie, on the other hand, was busy telling anyone who would listen that she was planning to press charges against her family for slander and threats. She claimed she was going to take action, but nothing ever came of it. No charges, no lawsuits, just more empty words. The family wasn't alone in their doubts. The Fayetteville police were also looking closely at Jeanie and Zach, both as suspects in Macy Grace's death. Even though the official cause and manner of death hadn't been finalized, it was pretty clear something terrible had happened, and it wasn't an accident. During the investigation, both Jeanie and Zach were given polygraph tests. Now, these tests aren't admissible in court, but they're still useful for investigators trying to figure out the truth. Jeanie took her first polygraph, and the results showed deception. She flat out failed her second test. As for Zach, they asked him 4 key questions. Did he hurt Macy? Did he know who hurt Macy? Did he help in any way with hurting Macy? And was he holding back any information about what happened? Zach said no to all 4, and the results strongly supported that Zach was telling the truth. As the investigation went on, the pieces of the puzzle were starting to come together. It was a grim picture, one that painted Jeanie in an even worse light. Everyone wanted answers, and every lie, every twisted story just seemed to bring more questions. The truth felt like it was slipping further away, buried beneath all the conflicting versions of what had happened. An autopsy was conducted, and that would soon bring some cold, hard facts into the chaos. But even before the results came in, the family and the investigators were left piecing together a tragedy that should have never happened. It was clear that there were too many lies, too many shifting stories, and one precious little girl who wasn't there to tell her side. And when the autopsy result came out, it brought everything into sharp focus. On December 7, 2015, the North Carolina Medical Examiner's Office released its findings, and what they revealed was heartbreaking. Macy Grace, just a 3-year-old small body, had endured so much. The report detailed countless injuries that no child should ever have to experience. Macy had suffered blunt force trauma, leaving her with multiple head injuries, including extensive scalp hemorrhages. There was bleeding on both sides of her brain, worse on the left side than the right. The swelling had gotten enough that her brain had herniated, meaning the pressure became too much for her tiny skull to contain. On top of that, Macy had a cut between her gums and cheek, along with bruising inside her mouth. It was clear that this kind of injury often happens when someone is hit hard enough to slam the teeth into the inside of their mouth. And it didn't stop there. Macy's liver showed signs of injuries too. Small lacerations that often happen from blunt force, the kind you'd see in car accidents or violence. Bruises covered her entire body, and some of them had a distinct pattern, almost like she'd been struck with an object. Reports say that it could have been from something like an electrical cord. To make things worse, patches of Macy's hair had been pulled out and were found in the bathtub drain. It painted a horrifying picture of what this little girl had gone through. There were also signs of pneumonia, which wasn't uncommon since Macy had been on a ventilator for 2 days. But it wasn't just medical intervention that left marks on her body. The bruises, cuts, and injuries were clearly separate from what the doctors had done to try to save her. On March 23, 2016, the Medical Examiner's Office officially ruled Macy Grace's death a homicide. They determined it was due to complications from blunt force trauma, and they didn't rule out asphyxial injuries like smothering or strangulation. This wasn't just an accident. Someone had done this to her. The very next day, March 24th, arrest warrants were issued for both Jeanie Cassandra Ditty and Zachary Earl Keffer. Fayetteville Police Department's homicide detectives moved quickly. They arrested 23-year-old Jeanie, charging her with first-degree murder and negligent child abuse causing serious injury. Zach, 32, faced the same charges, but at first they couldn't find him. Police asked the public for help, and by the following day, Zach turned himself in. Both Jeanie and Zach were held without bail at the Cumberland County Detention Center. With the charges they faced, both of them could have been eligible for the death penalty, though prosecutors hadn't yet decided if they would push for that. It was the start of what would be a long journey through the justice system, but at least for Macy Grace, there was finally a step towards some kind of justice. Jeanie was still considered an active military member when she was being investigated for Macy's murder. It didn't make sense to many, but that's how it went. Jeanie and Zach had their first court appearance at the jail, standing before District Court Judge Stephen Stokes. But then more things came out. Just a month after the arrests, there were more allegations against Zach. He was accused of multiple crimes connected to a domestic dispute in Cameron, North Carolina. The woman involved was later revealed to be his estranged wife, Lisa. That incident happened less than 3 weeks after Macy's death on December 22, 2015. Lisa made 2 calls to 911, but both times the call got off before she could give any details. When deputies arrived at the house, they found Zach there along with Lisa, who was badly hurt. Court documents said Zach had punched Lisa, slammed her into a bathtub, threatened to kill her, pointed a gun at her, and took her phone away when she tried to call for help. The next day, Zach was charged with first-degree kidnapping, assault, and several other offenses, including pointing a gun and interfering with emergency communications. He was held without bail for 48 hours, but was eventually released on a $177,000 bail. He remained out until his arrest in March. Then, after Jeannie's arrest, there was a photographer named Sonny Joe from Hazleton, Pennsylvania, who came forward with his story. Sonny specialized in creating keepsake photos for people who had lost loved ones. He called his photo package one more time. After Macy's death, Jeanie contacted him. She seemed like a grieving mother, and she asked Sonny to create some altered photos where Macy appeared as a ghostly angel at her grave. Sonny agreed. He edited the photos for free, touched by Jeanie's story. Jeanie posted those pictures all over social media, and soon after her arrest,
it's a haunting photograph, a mother at the grave of her little girl being comforted by a ghost-like image of her daughter. But the mother ended up being charged with the little girl's murder, and now everyone from the photographer to other family members are furious.
Sonny found himself in the middle of a storm. People were threatening him, tagging him, and even the police were calling. He felt terrible, realizing he'd been used.
I want to give her another chance to see her baby that she will never see again. Knowing that she used me and she used this to possibly make herself seem innocent, that's the worst feeling in the world.
Sonny told reporters he was horrified and angry. He had done about $500 worth of work for free, wanting to help a grieving mother, but instead, he found out Jeanie had used those photos to paint herself as innocent. Sonny called the detective handling the case and told them what happened. It was all just another layer of Jenny's lies.
She used my work to make people think that she's innocent.
She thought that it made her look like she was a grieving mother, that she was a good mother, that Macy was her whole life.
There was also the GoFundMe page that Jeanie and Zach set up after Macy's death. It was supposed to be for funeral expenses. They wrote that all money would go to Jeanie to use as needed for Macy's funeral. The page described Macy as a joyful child, surrounded by love, and they managed to collect $6,000 in donations before Zach took the page down. Jeanie's cousin Tiffany reached out to her, pointing out that Kevin's military insurance would cover the funeral. Kevin himself had offered to pay, and he did. But despite that, Jeanie had still gone ahead with the fundraiser, claiming she had no access to any money from Kevin. By January 2018, Jeanie had a whole new story. Now, she claimed that Zach had forced her to cover up Macy's murder, that she was afraid of him, and that he was the one who killed Macy. She said she had to go along with it all because she feared for her life. She painted herself as the victim, saying Zach was abusive. But 2 months after Macy's death, Jeanie had posted photos of herself bodybuilding. In those pictures, there were no visible injuries, just her fake tan and tattoos. And there was also a photo of her with Macy in the pool from the previous summer, where everything looked perfectly fine. It was just another twist in Jeanie's never-ending series of lies. After that, Zach's story started coming out. He always maintained that he was innocent. His lawyer, Mr. George, said that Jeanie called Zach to her apartment that morning because something was wrong with Macy Grace, and since Zach was a paramedic, she wanted his help. Zach said that when he arrived, Macy was vomiting through her nose, her jaw was clenched, and her limbs were moving involuntarily. It was obvious to him that her brain wasn't getting enough oxygen. He tried to help her while he told Jeanie to call 911. That version of events was different from what Jeanie said later. She claimed that Zach was watching Macy that morning while she went to her medical appointment at Fort Bragg. She said that when she got back about an hour later, she found Macy in distress and called 911. During her court testimony and a recorded police interview, Jeanie didn't initially say that she left Macy with Zach. She told the police she was at the appointment from around 9:38 a.m. until about 10 a.m., and that she had called Zach at 10:15 a.m. Jeanie's defense attorney, Mr. Condlin, even admitted to the media that Jeanie wasn't truthful at first. Something didn't add up. Google Maps showed that the drive from Stonemason Court to Fort Bragg takes between 20 and 40 minutes, depending on traffic. So there was definitely something off about Jeanie's timeline. And to make things worse, there were no medical records showing that Jeanie had seen a doctor that day. It looked like she just checked in at the wellness center and then left, probably just trying to create an alibi. Despite Jeanie's shifting stories, in early 2018, Cumberland County prosecutors offered her a plea deal. She would plead guilty to being an accessory after the fact to murder and testify against Zach. In exchange, she'd get a sentence of no less than 3 years and 8 months, most of which she had already served by then, and no more than 5 years and 5 months. She was cooperating with the prosecutors and investigators, but suddenly, in March 2018, the plea deal was taken off the table. That happened after the district attorney office had a conflict of interest. We don't know what the conflict was, but District Attorney Billy West stepped aside from the case. The Mecklenburg County District Attorney, Julia Ann Wolfe, took over, and by March 2018, she withdrew the plea deal that had been offered to Jeanie. Later that year, during a hearing in November, the prosecutors said she had offered new deals to both Zach and Jeanie, but the details weren't made public. Then, in a surprising twist, in November 2019, the prosecution dropped all the charges against Zach. Jeanie's charges still stood. On the dismissal document, the prosecutor wrote that new medical information provided a clearer timeline of the events, contradicting the previous medical details. This new information affected the chances of getting a conviction beyond a reasonable doubt.
Ms. Ditty left during that time frame to go to a doctor's appointment. When she left, the baby was fine. When she came home, the baby wasn't.
But Kiefer's attorney says the injuries happened before Kiefer got there and that he never abused the child. The prosecutor dropped Kiefer's charges, saying in part, quote, new medical information provides a clearer timeline of events and contradicts previous medical information. In the interest of justice, the state is dismissing these charges.
Zach's lawyer, Tony Buzzard, said that the medical evidence showed Macy's injuries were inflicted at least 12 hours before Jeanie called 911, which meant it was before Zach had even arrived at the apartment. Zach was finally released on November 1st, 2019, after spending almost 44 months in the Cumberland County Detention Center.
A former Special Forces soldier spent more than 3 years behind bars before the district attorney dropped the charges. Zachary Kiefer was accused of murder and child abuse in the death of his girlfriend's daughter. New at 6 o'clock, CBS 17's Kayla Strayer explains why those charges were dropped, but the little girl's mom is still in jail.
He later spoke about how tough it was, saying it was the hardest thing he'd ever been through, being accused of something he didn't do and struggling to have his voice heard in the justice system. He described it as being chewed up and spit out by the court machinery and said they tried to pressure him into taking a plea deal. But now he was focusing on rebuilding his life and being a good father to his 8-year-old daughter. He insisted that the accusations against him, especially the incident with his estranged wife, never happened. He said, "I never put my hands on her." And for Jeanie Cassandra Ditty, the court proceedings took a wild turn. During the trial, a nurse specializing in child abuse testified that child abuse often happens when kids are going through potty training. This detail struck a chord with the prosecution, who painted a picture of Jeanie being frustrated with Macy Grace's frequent dirty diapers. They argued that Jeanie was enraged and took it out on her daughter, which led to the tragic events. The prosecution claimed Jeanie fatally beat Macy before leaving for her so-called doctor's appointment at Fort Bragg. They argued that she either left Macy at home alone or, even worse, brought her along and left her in the car, gravely injured. Then, Zach arrived at the apartment, and about 30 minutes later, he noticed Macy was in distress. It was a grim scenario, but the defense wasn't buying it. The defense, once again, tried to point the blame back at Zach, arguing that Macy's injuries could have happened just before Jeanie called 911, while Zach was there. They didn't agree with the prosecution's claim that the injuries were inflicted hours earlier. Both sides were at a standoff, and it all came down to the jury. On March 20th, 2020, the jury returned their decision. Unfortunately, it wasn't a clear-cut outcome. The jury was hung, with 10 jurors voting for Jeanie's guilt and 2 voting to acquit. The problem, it seemed, was the idea of Jeanie's hands being considered a deadly weapon, which caused those 2 jurors to hesitate. Without a unanimous decision, the judge had no choice but to declare a mistrial. Jeanie was sent back to jail, with her bail set at $300,000. A few months later, her chief public defender, Bernard Condlin, resigned from his position, and a private attorney, Malayaka Kimre, took over Jeanie's defense. In April 2021, Jeanie was offered a new plea deal, this time to plead guilty to second-degree murder. Jeanie refused, saying she'd only plead guilty to felony child abuse with intent to hinder a police investigation and accessory charges. When asked what she meant by accessory, she didn't elaborate and rejected the deal, telling them to take her to trial again. Jeanie's second trial was scheduled for November 2021, but 4 days before it was set to begin, her new attorney filed a motion to enforce the old plea deal Jeanie was offered before her first trial. Despite 2 judges denying this motion in the past, Superior Court Judge James Floyd Ammons Jr. approved it. This led to the prosecution filing for a reconsideration hearing, where Judge Ammons seemed to tear into the prosecution. He said he felt Jeanie was the real victim and pointed the blame squarely at Zach, who no longer faced charges. The judge even asked the state to drop the charges against Jeanie, but they refused and filed an appeal. That appeal put Jeanie's case on hold. 4 years after the first trial and over 8 years since Macy Grace's death, there was still no resolution. Despite everything, Judge Ammons reduced Jeanie's bail, and in November 2021, she was released on an unsecured $25,000 bond.
Jeanie Ditty was charged with first-degree murder and child abuse, but her trial ended in a hung jury, with jurors voting 10-2 for conviction. Now, just before Thanksgiving, Ditty was released on $25,000 bail while she awaits her second trial.
Macy's family was furious. Her paternal grandmother, Tina Goodwin, expressed her anger, saying that the family would have gladly taken Macy if Jeanie couldn't care for her. Jeanie's aunt, Michelle Smith, added that they were devastated and worried Jeanie might hurt someone else.
She's out there walking the streets. What's going through your mind?
I'm worried that she is going to hurt someone else.
Even with her charges still pending, Jeanie seemed to move on with her life. By the end of 2022, her divorce from Kevin was finalized. Then, in November 2023, she gave birth to another baby, a little girl she has custody of, despite still facing charges for the death of Macy Grace. It's challenging for Macy's family to understand how Jeanie could be in this situation, still without real consequences for what happened. But through all the tragedy, there was at least a small silver lining. Macy's Nana, Tina, and Aunt Shelley grew incredibly close, supporting each other through the worst of times. They found comfort in their shared love for Macy, and their bond became unbreakable. Michelle even runs a Facebook page called Justice for Macy, where she shares updates on the case and posts memories of Macy, keeping her bright spirit alive. In the end, it's a story of heartbreak, betrayal, and a fight for justice that still hasn't found its conclusion. Macy Grace, a bright little girl with so much love to give, was taken far too soon. And those who loved her are left waiting for justice that seems forever out of reach. But they refuse to give up. They keep Macy's memory alive, and they keep pushing, hoping that one day there will be accountability. The system may have failed Macy, but her family won't let her be forgotten. They will fight, they will remember, and they will hold on to the hope that justice, even if delayed, will one day be served.